people talk about, both on the Democratic and Republican side now, how large can we think? How much political risk can we take? And when I was in Minneapolis Friday for the Blue State Ball, which was just great, KTNF just put on a total, they rocked the house. Somebody came up to me and said, I read your book, What Would Jefferson Do?, which I think is one of my best books, actually. And it's been a long time since it was published. It's been maybe a decade. And he said, you had that piece in there about what the founders gave up for signing the Declaration of Independence. And he said, would you please read that on the air again? It's just a page and a half. And share that with people in the context of, people whining about the trouble that they have to go through to go to a caucus or what a hassle it is to vote, right? So I just wanted to read to you from page, starting with page 52 of what would Jefferson do, and just share this with you, and then I'm going to get to your phone calls. The Declaration of Independence was the logical extension of the revolution ignited by the Tea Party, or initiated by the Boston Tea Party, and was signed by a group bearing similar diversity to those in the various states who later ratified the Constitution. Obviously, the diversity did not include racial or gender diversity. That's a whole other topic that we can talk about in another context. But just let me make this point. A dozen of the 56 signers of the Declaration of, and by the way, I've learned since this book was published, there's 2 or 3 things in here that are not 100% accurate. They're like one person did something else or something. But fundamentally, this is pretty accurate. A dozen of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were politicians, physicians, or Protestant ministers. 11 were merchants. 9 were farmers. Ben Franklin was hard to define, although at the time he was referred to as a printer and Renaissance man. Well, another signer was a musician. One was a teacher. They ranged in age from their 20s, literally their 20s, to Ben Franklin, who was in his 80s, who truly elderly. Thomas Jefferson, at 33, was the median age, the average age. These men were the most idealistic and determined among the colonists. While the conservatives of the day argued that America should remain a colony of England forever, these liberal radicals believed in both individual liberty and societal obligations. A nation must care for the lives of its own, guarantee liberty, and ensure its citizens, quote, happiness, a radical concept that had never before appeared in any nation's founding documents. We're talking about the Declaration of Independence here. The signers wrote in the Declaration, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, and it was a simple statement of fact. The day that they signed that document, each one of those men legally became a traitor, and every single one was collectively and individually sentenced to death for treason by the legal government that controlled their land and their homes. As Ben Franklin pointed out, they stood at a point of no return and, quote, indeed, we must all hang together, otherwise we shall most assuredly hang separately. When Rhode Island's Stephen Hopkins signed the document, he remarked to his friend William Ellery that, quote, my hand trembles, but my heart does not. But Virginia's Benjamin Harrison, who weighed nearly 300 pounds, commented to Massachusetts' Elbridge Gerry, a short, thin man, with me, the hanging will be over in a minute. You're going to be dancing in the air an hour after I'm gone. John Hancock, the wealthiest among them, he was worth about $700,000 in today's money, signed his name large enough that, quote, the king could read my name without glasses and now double the reward of 500 pounds that he'd already put on my head for sedition. Just 6 months earlier, Hancock would lose his newborn daughter to complications of childbirth. Sometimes I can't even read this stuff. To complications of childbirth arising from his wife's fleeing the oncoming British Army. He lost his child. Although wealthy by the standards of the day, he would hardly qualify as rich by today's standards. He founded no dynasty and no foundations today dispense his money. His legacy is our nation. Another of the wealthiest of the signers was Thomas Nelson of Virginia. But a year after the signing, the British had seized his home and lands. When he and George Washington attacked the British in Nelson's hometown, Nelson encouraged George Washington to attack his own home, the Nelson homestead, which British General Cornwallis had taken as his headquarters, attack it with cannons. The house was destroyed. And after the war, Nelson, unable to repay loans he'd taken out against it to help finance the revolution, lost his property and died in poverty at the age of 50. I've got to get myself under control here. I'm sorry. It's been a long time since I read my own book. The wealthy Philadelphia merchant Robert Morris lost 150 ships at sea at the war, wiping out his small fortune. Signer William Ellery of Rhode Island similarly lost everything, as did Virginia's Carter Braxton and Benjamin Harrison, Pennsylvania's George Clymer, New York's Phillips Livingston, Georgia's Lyman Hall, and New Jersey's Francis Hopkinson. The British destroyed New York's Francis Lewis's property and threw his wife into such a hellhole of a jail that she died 2 years later in that jail. 3 of South Carolina's 4 signers, Edward Rutledge, Thomas Hayward Jr., and Arthur Middleton, were captured by the British and held in a filthy, unheated prison and brutally tortured for over a year before George Washington was able to free them in a prisoner exchange. New Jersey farmer John Hart's wife died shortly after he signed the Declaration, and his 13 children were scattered among sympathetic families to hide them from the British and the conservative loyalists. He never saw them again, dying alone and racked with grief 3 years later. Altogether, 17 of the signers were wiped out by the war that they declared. New Jersey State Supreme Court Justice Richard Stockton took his wife and children into hiding after he signed the Declaration, but conservatives loyal to the crown turned him in. He was so badly beaten and starved in the British prison that he died before the war was over. His home was looted, and his wife and children lived the rest of their lives as paupers. Altogether, 9 of the men in that room died. 4 lost their children as a direct result of putting their names to the Declaration of Independence, and every single one of them had to flee his home. And after the war, 12 returned to find only rubble. It goes on, but as Benjamin Franklin told Philadelphia's Mrs. Powell after she asked him what sort of nation had been conceived, he said, "It is a republic, madam, if you can keep it." And maybe I'm so upset about this right now because I'm watching Donald Trump, the absolute antithesis, the entire Republican Party for that matter, the absolute antithesis of the Enlightenment that the revolution was founded on, with an actual chance to run this country. It's just amazing.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.